Well, finally, after years of planning and talking about it, we were off to the Kimberley for a 28-day trip. We set off on a Friday night with the trusty old Landcruiser, towing the Pioneer Mitchell camper, and we stayed at Gibberding, about 300 k's north of Perth. And the next morning it was freezing, but we were back to on the road for the long drive. We turned off onto the dirt when we got to Newman, on the way up through Nullagine and then Marble Bar. We had an interesting time. We got a flat tyre on that Nullagine road. And then on the road into Marble Bar, it was already late, dark, and the headlights stopped working. So that made it an interesting time when you're doing 100 k's an hour. I quickly pulled over and we found somewhere safe to stop, and then luckily being a mechanic I was able to rewire the relay and get at least one headlight working so we could get into Doolina Gorge. Because it was already by about 9 o'clock by that stage, so we just pulled up onto the sandy riverbed and stopped there for the night. Beautiful spot to wake up to. You can see the sun shining on the sides of the gorges. Very, very picturesque spot. So I was glad that we did finally make it, despite the earlier issues with the headlights. And from Doolina Gorge, we continued up the inland road, and eventually through via the bore line we made it to 80 Mile Beach, which was a very pleasant sight after 3 days of driving. Also great for the kids, having spent 3 days in the car, they finally had a chance to stretch their legs a little bit. After another solid day of driving, we were finally in the East Pilbara, and we turned off onto the Tanami Road for a nice rough trip down to Wolf Creek Crater. Being dirt, we had to drop the tyre pressures, all 6 tyres, including the camper trailer. And again, the kids had a bit of time to stretch their legs and have a bit of fun. Next morning, once again, the car troubles continued with the tyre on the right rear going flat. Definitely had some flashbacks to the movie, waking up to the car being immobilised. And it's just a short walk from the campground to the Wolf Creek Crater. Doesn't look that special from the top, but when you climb down you can see how high those sides are, and very interesting to imagine the force that was involved when that meteorite hit. From Wolf Creek was just a short drive up to the Bungle Bungles, and then a very long, slow trip in. The Spring Creek track is well known as being a rough, winding, hilly trip, and certainly with the camper trailer we just took it easy. It took nearly 3 hours to do the 50 k's. There was plenty of traffic around. In spots the road is very narrow, so it's a bit of a squeeze. Lots of little creek crossings and other things, so it was just a slow, easy drive, seeing how we were on holidays. We had 4 days here, so we didn't have to rush to get in there. Although the same couldn't be said for some of the other people that we passed on the way through. There was definitely some people speeding on their way in and out. Nice little campsites here at the Bungle Bungles. Lots of grass around, so there are no campfires allowed. after 4 days of driving. It was certainly nice knowing we're going to get out and stretch our legs, although the next morning not everybody was overly keen on getting up. Our first day in the Bungle Bungles was at the Piccaninny Creek end, where the famous beehive domes are found. And of course, being school holidays, there's plenty of other tourists around. And it's time to get the hiking boots on, and we spent the whole day hiking along Piccaninny Creek and stopping at the various main attractions and places like Cathedral Gorge and a few other interesting spots. The next day was the other end of the park, where Echidna Chasm was the main attraction. And we timed it so we were there when the sun was directly overhead, like a spotlight inside the chasm.
Walk, Mom. Stop.
After a few lovely days in the Bungle Bungles, it was back on the road for the scenic drive into Kununurra and our lakeside camping spot. And the next morning was another early start and a chance to see the Bungle Bungles from the air. Also very nice views of the Kununurra region and of course Lake Argyle and the Argyle Diamond Mine. It's only from the air that you really do appreciate the scale of the Bungle Bungle region. It's actually just a very small part of the range country. On the return trip from the Bungle Bungles, they fly over the Argyle Diamond Mine. And it was an interesting story the pilot told us. The geologists were actually just looking for other minerals and walking up a creek, and they found the diamonds. And they ended up just following that creek until the diamonds eventually stopped. And that's where they knew the source of the diamonds were. The Argyle mine actually closed in November 2020, so it operated for 37 years and produced 865 million carats of diamonds. After the flight, we returned to our beautiful lakeside camp in Kununurra and enjoyed some of the bird life and a little bit of sightseeing around Kununurra, including the Ivanhoe crossing where we could try to spot some crocodiles. And then we headed off to Lake Argyle for a tour and a boat cruise. The homestead was the first stop. It's the one they relocated brick by brick or stone by stone in this case. And then on the boat to cruise the beautiful Lake Argyle.
You got hit in the face.
And also catfish.
And of course, what does a teenager do after seeing a crocodile? They go swimming in the brook. And then after the swim and a few beers and snacks, it was time to just enjoy the scenery. Another beautiful Kimberley sunset. From Kununurra, it was just a short drive on the bitumen to the town of Wyndham and the Five Rivers Lookout. And some of the famous Kimberley boabs.
Oh, you get rash on.
And finally, onto the Gibb River Road. And our first glimpses of the Coburn Range. Still on the bitumen, we can get into El Questro's Emma Gorge, which is a fairly easy walk, and down to a very scenic little end with a small waterfall and a very, very cold pool. A little bit further along the Gibb is the main turn off to El Questro station, and once again very scenic country with the Coburn Ranges all around us. An interesting drive into El Questro, and there was a few river crossings, nothing too bad. A little bit rocky but not deep. Being school holidays, El Questro can be really, really busy, so we paid a little bit extra to get a little bit less, but we had the remoteness of the river camps, so it was very nice to have plenty of space and nobody around us. And quite a nice backdrop, the river and the ranges just behind. And fortunately, campfires are allowed. Zebedee Springs was our first destination after arriving and setting up at El Questro. A very scenic walk through the palms before you get to the main pool area where it was full of tourists. But definitely worth the effort. very nice, relaxing in those warm springs. However, we couldn't spend all day just lounging around in the hot springs, so it was time to get the walking boots back on and into El Questro Gorge. There was quite a deep river crossing on the way to El Questro Gorge, so that helped to keep some of the tourists away. Beautiful evening sitting around the campfire, and it also gave us a chance to practice our cooking. Lovely roast lamb and veggies for dinner, and the next morning chopped chip damper. It's not just gorges and the hot springs at El Questro, they've also pushed through quite a few tracks up to the tops of the ranges. Plenty of scenic views.
Stop, Alicia.
It was such a dry year for us. The Pentecost River wasn't a river, it was just a dry riverbed. And then a short drive up the Gib to Home Valley Station. Very basic camping at Home Valley, but they do have excellent facilities. There's a very nice restaurant, and they've got the swimming pool. And as it was Ryan's birthday, we did treat ourselves to a meal at the restaurant. After leaving Home Valley, the Gib really bit us hard. You can see a flat tyre and another one. With only one spare, it quickly hit home just how remote this area is. And you can understand why the Gib has its reputation. Unfortunately, I was able to plug one of the tyres and fit the spare for the other one, so we were able to continue on, and we finally hit the Columbaroo Road and its famous corrugations. We stopped at a couple of the roadhouses on the way, but nobody had the right size tyres for us, so we ended up doing this section with no spares. But fortunately no more flat tyres, and we were able to reach our destination at King Edward River Campground. Another very grassy area, but you can see they've cleared it, so you're still able to have campfires as long as you bring some wood. King Edward River Campground is at the start of the Mitchell Falls Road, and because of the road's condition we opted to leave the camper here and we just drove in to Mitchell Falls the next day. Quite a long walk on the way in there, although there's plenty of nice scenery, including the Mertens Falls. And once again these falls were completely dry. I guess one advantage of everything being dry, we did get a unique perspective. This is standing right above Mitchell Falls. And you can see that little trickle, that's all there is. Even without masses of water, it is still a very spectacular sight. And fortunately for us, we booked the helicopter ride, so that was our express trip on the way back, rather than walking back to the car. There are no rear doors on the helicopter, so it's great for photography. A little bit hairy. You've got to rely on your seatbelt to its job. I definitely recommend people to do the helicopter trip. You do get a different perspective from being on the ground. Definitely appreciate the size of the Kimberley. Due to the notoriety of the Mitchell Falls Road, we opted to have a lazy day at King Edward River. It was a chance for me to just check over the car, make sure all the wheel bearings and everything else were okay. Once the maintenance duties were over, we were free to just lay around and enjoy the King Edward River, float around in the tubes and have a few beverages. And another lovely night by the campfire. Manning Gorge was our next destination. It's a very interesting start to the trip. You're going to jump in a little boat and pull yourself across the river. And then after a short hike, it was time to spend the rest of the day swimming and laying around on the rocks. From Manning Gorge, it was just a short drive along the Gib to Bell Gorge. And this is definitely one of the highlights of the Gib River Road. Once again, not a lot of water over the waterfall, but still very stunning scenery. Beautiful Kimberley Gorge. And once again, we spent most of the day just swimming and lying around on the rocks and exploring the gorge.
Well, Dad, how come this big rock coming up?
For a change of scenery, after all the gorges, it was into Tunnel Creek. There's an interesting climb to get into the tunnel. Lots of scrambling over rocks and squeezing through some tight little gaps. The security guard was still at his post. And don't forget the torches if you're planning on going into Tunnel Creek. Our final destination along the Gib was Winjana Gorge. Once again, an interesting walk into the gorge. Narrow entry. And then lots and lots of freshwater crocodiles. Winjana Gorge is the remains of an ancient Devonian reef. And we stayed the night at the Winjana campground, which is just a few minutes away from Winjana Gorge. Busy little spot, very good facilities in this campground, including showers. And the old prison bower was the final attraction for us, and the end of the Gib River Road before making our way onto Broome, where we had a lovely sunset at Cable Beach. After leaving Broome, we headed down to Cape Corydron, just north of Port Hedland. It's the southern end of 80 Mile Beach. So once again, beautiful beach, lovely white sand, and fantastic sunsets. It was a busy camping area, but we were fortunate enough to find a nice spot right on the edge of the creek. We stopped in at Port Hedland on the way down, and Ryan was good enough to catch our lunch. Some beautiful octopus. We crumbed and fried the ockies, made for a delicious lunch, and then we headed off down the inland highway on our return to Perth, through the lovely Mungina Gorge, just next to Carragini. We just bush camped every night on the way south to Perth. Unfortunately, as we did head further south near Mount Magnet, there were plenty of wildflowers around, which helped to break up the trip. Also helping to break up the trip were the regular interactions with the mining gear that was being transported on the highway. And then the final bush camping was back at Gibberding, where we spent the first night. About 3 hours out of Perth. And unfortunately, that was the end of our 28-day Kimberley trip.